June 3rd, 2022, approximately 7:40 p.m. Sacred Heart Hospital and Emergency Shelter. Avro rested his arms on the front desk, aiming what, in his opinion, was his 1,000-watt smile at Nora. She didn't look up from her screen, her fingers flying over the keys with the unbroken tapping of a pro. Avro leaned in, trying to see what she was working on. All he caught was some sort of form she was filling in before she reached up, not breaking eye contact with her screen, and pulled her desk sign over in front of Avro's nose. "Welcome to Sacred Heart. Please take a seat and someone will be with you shortly." Avro made a show of grimacing and rolling his dark eyes. "Nora, you're killing me." "Lucky you, you're in a hospital." He was almost certain she batted those impossibly long lashes at him before turning her attention back to the screen. He drummed his fingers on the white counter right beside the chip in its pristine surface where someone had fainted and slammed their head. He stood out just as starkly in the pure white room with his dark skin and his stained EMT coat. Nora sucked her lips and turned, both brows raised. Though she didn't wear much makeup, who did these days, she had managed to line her eyes so they really popped. Avro clutched his chest and staggered back, still grinning. "Girl, be careful with those eyes. Anyone would fall in love just looking at them." Nora sighed. "Are you that bored, Avro? Aren't there some zombs out by the fence you and the guys could go throw cans at?" She pulled a pencil from behind her ear and lightly rapped his fingers. He pulled his hand away and flashed her another smile. "Not today. I only have eyes for you, beautiful." "Lucky me." Was it his imagination, or did her lips tremble like someone trying not to smile? "You know you love me, don't lie." He waggled his eyebrows and was sure he caught a smile this time. Nora gestured at her screen. "I've got a backlog of patient forms to enter before the power goes out tonight. The governor rationed it back by another hour, didn't you hear?" Avro shrugged. "It's always off when I get home anyway. What's another hour?" "Tell that to Stanley. If he has to limp those generators along any longer than necessary." Right. Avro slouched against the counter, this time facing the empty waiting room. Only one bank of lights was on, illuminating the scuffed plastic chairs and the sliding doors that had been propped open with a bucket of gravel. He envisioned the maintenance guy, who somehow managed to be crotchety at the age of 35 and wandered the halls with perpetual stubble and a malaise of cigarette smoke. "Let's not think about Stan, huh? It's really killing my game." "Look at you thinking you have game," Nora snorted. "Why don't you go wipe down your rig and play catch with Tia or—" Nora was cut short as the phone beside her rang. They both jumped, but she composed herself instantly. She gave Avro a warning look as she put the receiver to her ear. "Sacred Heart Hospital, emergency dispatch speaking." "Where are you located?" She deftly clicked around to the correct screen and began typing furiously. Avro pushed back from the counter, his heart rate already rising. An emergency call right before lights out? This was the kind of action he was looking for. If he couldn't get Nora to flirt with him anyway. He listened as she rattled off her questions, trying to glean what was going on. Her voice was level, steady, exactly the kind of calm someone in a crisis would want to hear. Avro bounced on the balls of his feet. Nora switched from typing to a notepad beside her. She wrote without missing a conversational beat and passed the paper to Avro. 8774 Michigan, apartment 205. Extract if necessary. Midwife on premises needs backup with a breech. Avro read the note in a glance, then jammed it into his pocket and headed for the door. "We've got a live one," Avro called as he crossed the inner lot, heading to where his ambulance stood alone, a white beacon in the dusk. Her sides had been reinforced and her front had been modified to act like an old-fashioned cow catcher. She was a funny-looking rig, but she did the job. Her sides were marked with a typical Red Cross, but Avro had painted pale blue angel wings right above the front doors. Sacred Heart had 3 such rigs, though one was perpetually down for repairs. The other team was already out, so there was no danger of anyone poaching this rescue. "What have we got?" Corinne kicked the ambulance's back door open and stuck her head out, her black braid falling over her shoulder. Avro winced. "Stop kicking my rig, woman!" Corinne swore at him in Spanish and flipped him off, though he knew there wasn't malice behind it. She communicated almost entirely through cussing, and at this point it was a wonder that there were still people who didn't. She finished her tirade with, well, what the hell have we got? Birth going bad. Midwife sent out an SOS. Corinne jumped down from the back and snorted. Fucking hell. I'll never understand why people bring kids into this. She gestured around the parking lot caged by tall fences. Because the human race is gonna human race. The final member of their team, Alan, appeared from around the front of the ambulance. He snapped the folding chair he'd been lounging on shut. He was the oldest of the three, but Avro never saw that slow the man down. Corinne made a tch-ing noise and jogged for the small pole shed that had been constructed after the fall for use by the ambulance and her crew. Avro could still remember back in the day when ambulances would dispatch from somewhere separate from the hospital they reported to. These days the rule was, once you get safe, you stay put. What territory? Alan asked before he turned and unceremoniously frisbeed his folding chair towards the shed. Avro took out his paper and grimaced. Michigan Street. That's Lovelace. Well, that'll be fun. Alan winced sympathetically through his impressive mustache. Avro often wondered how the man's husband could stand kissing those bristly lips, but he kept that to himself. Motherfucking Lovelace. Corinne's voice carried across the whole inner lot. Afraid so, Avro called back as casually as if she had spoken normally. Corinne came back, swearing under her breath in Spanish again. She pitched a stiff pack of leather wrapped in a skillfully knotted cable at Avro's chest. He caught it deftly and hooked a finger under the knot, giving a sharp shake to let the armor fall loose. Hardened leather was the best for ease of movement at the price. Maybe bigger hospitals could afford more, but Avro just counted himself lucky that he wasn't wearing carpet like he'd seen some guys get stuck with. He pulled each piece expertly into place down to a gorget, which he left hanging open at his throat. All clasps clasped, Alan scolded. Right, Mom, Avro sighed, closing the gorget. You too, Missy, Alan eyed Corinne as she passed, her braids swinging behind her all the way to her butt. Yeah. Her tone was dismissive, but her smile was fond. She buckled the gorget and pulled her braid up, tying it away into a bun in 3 expert motions. Let's go. It's not getting any lighter, and I heard they just rolled back the power shut-off times again. Alan turned to the shed again and whistled. Tia, come on, girl, let's go. A brown blur shot from the darkness of the shed. She stopped at Alan's feet. A sloppy pitbull grin spread across her wide face. She wagged her stump tail and pricked docked ears that hinted at her past. She was a squat, bow-legged little creature, and invaluable to their team. Really, they could use more dogs, but Tia was all they had, and they were grateful for it. She stood quietly, grinning at Avro, while Alan hastily buckled her armor on. All right, up and in, girl, Alan finished and gestured towards the back of the ambulance. Tia leaped in. Shotgun, Corinne called before Avro could say anything. He shrugged and pulled himself into the back, strapping himself into the smaller seat there. Tia jumped into his lap. Oh no, he chuckled as he arranged the dog on his legs. I have to sit in the back with you. What a shame. Tia covered his face in sloppy kisses. The rig kicked to life. All 3 took a moment, perhaps half a second, to listen to the engine. Avro had insisted that both Alan and Corinne keep up to date with the vehicle maintenance skills. This wasn't the time to have gaps in your skills. When everything sounded fine, Alan pulled them out of the lot towards the inner gate. The hospital, like most essential buildings, was surrounded by 2 fences, thick wire and sturdy posts, paid for by the government. Avro leaned so he could make out the razor wire looped at the top of the inner fence, while Alan informed the guard what their current destination in ETA was. The wire always looked suspiciously grimy to Avro, like maybe a few more zombs climbed past the first barrier than anyone cared to admit. He shuddered. In most places, just 1 fence stood between you and the gnashing teeth of the hungry undead. Avro lived in a territory controlled by the National Guard, so he could feel relatively safe, but both Alan and Corinne lived in gang territory. Avro was lucky and he knew it. If his dad hadn't died in the first outbreak, back when life insurance was still paying out, he wouldn't have been able to afford such nice digs. He chewed the inside of his lip and tried not to think about it as they passed the outer checkpoint and slipped onto the street. No cars tonight, Alan muttered, scanning the streets. Vehicle usage was regulated except in the case of emergency. People were supposed to hunker down at home as much as possible and save the fuel for vehicles like ambulances. Mostly, it ended up being hoarded and fought over by various gangs. This whole sector was supposed to be patrolled, but Avro didn't see any squat, tan military SUVs trundling around. They pulled out past an old supermarket, a repurposed hotel, a gutted liquor store. Nothing had glass in the windows. It was either broken or replaced with boards. Tia licked Avro's chin, snapping him from his thoughts. You guys remember what this street used to be like? Avro scratched behind Tia's ears. Not this again, Corinne rolled her eyes. Come on, guys, it's been 2 weeks since I whinged about the situation, Avro joked. Corinne, be nice. Alan took a turn with artful speed. He had a knack for covering ground without rolling them over any curbs or objects neglected in the road. The kid feels how he feels. Yeah, Corinne folded her arms. It's been 3 years, Avro. We can stop picturing the perfect neighborhoods and happy families. Yeah, he waved off her scorn. Speaking of happy families, what do you have against babies? Avro asked, deciding he might take a jab or two at her. Corinne winced. It just seems stupid, you know? Having kids in a time like this. Besides, she turned in her seat, eyes going wide and smile growing wild. My papa told me he heard about this one lady, right? Corinne, don't, Alan groaned. She ignored him. Over on Eleanor Street, her baby died before it could be born, and it turned while it was still inside her. She made a fist and pushed the fingers of her other hand through it to burst out. It chewed its way out of her. Avro raised an eyebrow. A baby in utero can't be infected unless the mother is. Corinne huffed. Stop ruining my stories with your science. It happened, okay? My dad wouldn't lie. Passing out of guard territory, Alan warned. No fence this time, but a barricade of abandoned cars flanking the road spoke of some attempt to slow the dead. 3 years later, and no one had the infrastructure to fence everything. Avro craned forward, scanning for human figures in the debris. Anyone out this time of day was either in trouble or worse. Everyone fell silent, and Alan was obliged to drive slower as the roads outside military control weren't as well cleared. They passed a minivan with an open side door, and Avro felt sure he spotted a shambling figure lurch out before they silently slipped by and left it in the dust. The siren was out of the question, not unless you wanted to make yourselves a beacon. Avro had heard of a crew who did it. They'd been trying to save a group of people trapped by a horde. The ambulance crew had blared their sirens to draw the zombies away. Avro was pretty sure the whole crew had died, but it was still fucking impressive if it was true. Here we go, Alan grouched. Avro could just see him rolling his eyes. Lovelace is up to his usual shit. Avro leaned again to see. Tia nearly slipped off his lap, but she managed to scramble back on, her blunt claws finding a gap in Avro's armor. His breath hitched even though he'd expected what he saw. 2 zombies hung from thick tree branches. They dangled, limbs thrashing weakly, clacking their jaws. Avro couldn't help the shiver that went up his spine. This was Lovelace's warning that they were heading onto his turf. Avro didn't know any gang leaders who would stop an ambulance, but there was a first time for everything. Moments later, they pulled into the lot of the apartment building. 205, Avro reminded his companions before he braced, ready to leap out the back. What the fuck are you doing here? 2 men with white ribbons pinned to the fronts of leather jackets swaggered up to Alan's window. One of them had a modified baseball bat over his shoulder, the other had a rifle. Neither looked particularly well kept. Tia growled low on Avro's lap. Listen, you fuckers, we've got a red cross on the side of our ambulance. We're here to help your people, or didn't Lovelace get the memo? Corinne pronounced ambulance slowly, like the 2 men were children, then kicked her door open and launched herself out. Yeah. One of the men waved a dismissive hand, scowling across Alan at Corinne. How many of you? He leaned, trying to see into the back of the ambulance. 3 and a holder dog. Avro waved hello, and Tia's stumpy tail thumped against his thighs. Holder dog, huh? Nice. The second man, the quieter of the 2, said appreciatively. We're in a hurry, gents. Alan pushed his door open and the 2 men were forced to step back. It's almost lights out, the first man warned. We're aware, and that's why we're in a bit of a rush, Alan said. Avro opened the back doors and hauled the stretcher out, the legs snapping open. Tia jumped down, eyeing the two men with suspicious little eyes. Hey! Hey! Everyone turned to follow the shout. A woman was leaning from a second-floor window, waving her arms. We're your destination! Right, let's go, Avro urged, pushing the stretcher towards the front door of the apartment building. Hey now, hold on just a second. The man with the rifle stepped in Avro's way. We haven't done our checks. Any one of you could be bitten right now, and we wouldn't know. Jimmy! The woman in the window was shouting again. Avro wished she'd stop. Even a raised voice could draw in a few zombs if they happened to be nearby. Jim, do not tell me you are stopping those emergency responders. Bella, it's Lovelace's orders, the man complained in a voice that reminded Avro of a little kid. Corinne walked up beside Avro and grabbed the front of the stretcher, pulling it out and around Jimmy. His companion eyed them, but seemed less motivated to stop them. The woman went on scolding. Jim, I don't care what Lovelace says. If you stop these fine folks, you can tell him that next time he gets a raging infection in his leg, he can find himself a different midwife to save his pathetic life. Midwifery was really making a comeback, as most women gave birth at home these days. People had also begun to rely on these women for other medical care, especially if you were a powerful crime lord and looking not to cross into military territory for help. While Avro admired the tough women who traveled from place to place delivering babies, he was also certain that a doctor would be better when it came to saving infected limbs. And you, Eric, I will have words with your mama if I find out you've siphoned 1 ounce of their gas while these nice people are helping me. The second man turned bright red and looked away. Avro and his companions pushed past the two-man blockade and headed into the building. The front door was reinforced, and someone had to open it from the inside. To Avro's surprise, the door guard was a little girl with jet-black hair and an expression so piercing Avro felt X-rayed. The door looked almost too heavy for her to handle. You here for the baby? She asked. Yup. Avro tried to smile, though he found it shaky under her unsettling stare. The girl nodded and pushed the heavy door aside. Then she pointed at the elevator just in time for all the lights to go out. Fuck, Corinne snarled. Seconds later, the flashlight she had strapped to the front of her armor clicked to life, illuminating things just enough for Avro and Alan to get their own flashlights from their bags. Avro's light snapped on in time to see the little girl shaking her head. No elevator, I guess. Stairs are over there. Great! Avro fought to remain doggedly optimistic as they abandoned their stretcher in the lobby. Already a few faces appeared, curious looky-loos popping out of their apartments to gape at the strangers. Let's go. Corinne strode towards the stairs, Tia wagging in her wake. She paused to glare around at the watchers. No one had better touch that stretcher, or I'll send this dog after you, and she's trained to crush bones. A few people disappeared back into the dark, presumably to their apartments. Corinne led the way up the stairs. Avro wasn't one to spook easily, but the dark stairwell was downright unsettling. His heart stuttered for the first time. Zombies and trees, men with guns, all par for the course, but dark stairwells where for all he knew the hungry undead were looking just beyond the last shadow? No thank you. It was only Tia's steady wagging just a few steps ahead that kept him moving. On the second floor they were met by another young person. This girl was a scrawny teen who took them in with a glance. She held up a crank-charged lantern before her and jabbed a thumb behind. This way. Avro assumed she must be the midwife's apprentice. Informal apprenticeships were starting to make a comeback this year. There was talk of teens riding along on ambulance runs someday soon, to learn the ropes. Avro wasn't certain how he felt about that, but this girl seemed steady and practical, leading the way through the dark without a missed step. Inside the apartment things were warm and close. Avro could hear the distressed mother from the hall, though she was in the back room. He was surprised that no one greeted them as he, Corinne, and Alan poured into the small home. There was the distinct smell of sweat, old food, and stagnant water. He ignored the jumble of dishes in the sink and the laundry piled in the corner. Once in the room with mother and midwife, the real business began. Avro, Corinne, and Alan went to work like the well-oiled machine they were, moving almost as one. Blood pressure, a report from the midwife, dilation, all were taken and assessed. Any cord prolapse? Corinne asked, checking off a little chart she wore strapped to her arm. Corinne liked to have everything attached to her body for ready use. Not yet, Bella, the midwife said. I've spent the last hour trying to turn baby, but it's a stubborn one, and it's intent on coming out feet first, so we called you. Just in time, too, before the lights went out. Bella's mood was bright, though her attitude couldn't hide the lines of exhaustion on her face. What's your name? Avro asked, as he leaned to look into the laboring mother's eyes. She was strikingly beautiful, even in distress, with dark brown hair wreathing a sweat-streaked face. Rosie, she panted, managing to give him a smile. All right, Rosie, I think your midwife is right. We should take you in. Try to get this baby some help before things turn bad. Rosie nodded, her lips tightening. Something dawned on her face. But the power... We'll have to carry you, Avro said, businesslike again. He began arranging her sheets under her. Blanket carry? He asked Alan. The older man nodded. Avro could tell Alan was making calculations in his head, tracing their most efficient route with his eyes and memory. What? No, Rosie gasped before she was overcome with another contraction. She grabbed blindly and found Avro's hand. He let her keep it, even though her nails dug crescents into his skin. He tried not to wince in front of Corinne, who was clearly struggling not to laugh. Even the taciturn midwife's apprentice ducked her head and swept a fringe of hair in front of her face to hide her amusement. Avro bore up as manfully as he could. When the moment subsided, Rosie looked pleadingly up at him. No, please, I can't. Don't, we'll figure out how to have the baby here. The midwife swept in, shunting Avro out of the way. Now, Rosie, you know this is best for your baby. It's in danger, and you want to make sure we can help it, right? Rosie considered for a moment, lips tight. You can do this. Corinne's voice was the last one Avro expected to hear. You're a badass. I can tell. Look, amiga, I've seen a lot of shit in these last 3 years, and you're bringing a baby into this, which means you have to be a fierce enough lioness to protect it. So let's start now. Avro turned to Alan and mouthed, Lioness? Alan shrugged, but he was grinning as he moved to the other side of the bed to take up the sheets there, ready to carry Rosie down the stairs. The mother had locked eyes with Corinne, and something passed between them. Avro wasn't certain what, but he could appreciate that it was there. He looked back to Rosie. Ready? She gave a couple panting huffs, then nodded. Alan and Avro lifted. Rosie cried out, but the two didn't stop. Avro knew without asking that there would be no stopping. They had to get this woman to the ambulance in one try. There was a palpable threat all around them, behind every closed door. Even inside a building with armed men patrolling outside, you could never be certain. Never. The stairs were hell. In the dark and close space, the 3 responders struggled to get Rosie down, as she struggled with a labor of her own. The midwife and her apprentice did their best to help, but everything about it was awkward and painful for all involved. Avro nearly tripped over his own foot as he pivoted to guide Rosie around the bend in the stairs. For one deadly sharp moment, he thought this was it. He'd go sprawling down the stairs, injuring himself and seriously hurting poor Rosie. He jerked his foot into place with a grunt that was drowned out by Rosie's moans. His ankle twinged, but he wasn't falling, and that was all he wanted. The stretcher was still in the lobby and appeared to have all its wheels. Small miracles, Alan muttered as he set Rosie onto it. When it didn't collapse due to someone stealing other crucial pieces, they kicked it up to height and headed for the door. As the little girl pushed the heavy door ajar for them, and Avro idly wondered if she and the apprentice might be siblings, Tia let out a growl. Avro's first instinct was to freeze, but they were half in and half out the big door, not a place to waffle in an attack. With no street lights and the sun setting behind the building, it was difficult to get a handle on the situation outside. Men were shouting. He heard another dog, maybe 2, and the guttural moans he had come to know in his soul. Every nerve ending fired at that sound, the hungry undead. How many, how many, how many? Someone shoved him from behind. He stumbled, pushing Rosie and her stretcher out the door with him. It took him a moment to realize it was the young door guard who was sending them all out with cold efficiency. He turned in time to see her slam the door on all of them, her eyes dull. This was a world where a preteen had to make decisions about risks, and she'd assessed their lives versus endangering the people in the building, and made her choice. Avro couldn't blame her. He swept his flashlight over the parking lot between his group and the ambulance, praying that Bella the midwife's threats had been enough to keep the men from siphoning all their fuel. The path looked clear, but as he swung the light further into the lot, he spotted the combat. 4 men wearing armor, including the 2 who had greeted them before, were dealing with a pack of zombs. No sign of a horde yet. Avro squinted, trying to count zombies, gray-faced and dead, yellow eyes staring. They all looked similar, and he guessed they might be a family. Infection must have found their home and taken them all. He winced in sympathy. "Can we move?" Bella's voice was high and panicked. She tucked her apprentice against her side and held Rosie's hand. "Let's go," Alan agreed. "I haven't cleared the whole area," Avro gasped as Corinne and Alan started the stretcher rolling again. Gunfire sounded, punctuated by sharp flashes in his periphery. Most people tried to conserve ammo, so if they were firing, it meant that these zombs were giving the men some trouble. Rosie wailed, clasping her midwife's hand. Bella leaned in to speak reassuringly as they picked up their pace to a jog. A sound to his left made Avro turn. His heart nearly exploded when his flashlight beam found a zombie shambling towards them from the other side of the lot. This loner must have been drawn by the noise. "Shit," was all he managed, pushing the stretcher faster. Corinne darted ahead, yanking the back doors open. The ambulance was like a welcome finish line, but that adult zombie was intent on its goal. "Tia, hold him," Alan commanded without looking up. Tia, who had been keeping up with them, snarling and awaiting her orders, darted out. She launched herself, a dense little missile, latching her powerful jaws on the zombie's arm and bearing it to the ground in the same motion. The zombie clawed at her armor, but the dog didn't seem to notice as she snarled and held the creature in place. Most animals were immune to the virus and ignored by zombies, which humans used to their advantage, training dogs like Tia to hold targets in place, to be shot, or to carry supplies. While a zombie would make efforts to free itself from an animal's grasp, once it got free, it wouldn't turn on the animal, instead recommencing its efforts to find a human. With the zombie held for the moment, the team pressed on, and loaded the still wailing Rosie into the rig, complete with midwife and apprentice. Avro climbed in, not quite shutting the door, peering out to keep an eye on the dog, and in case other uninvited guests paid a visit. Alan and Corinne piled in through the passenger side door, and moments later the engine roared to life, punctuated by Rosie's increasingly distressed cries. "Tia!" Avro shouted. Tia seemed a bit sad to relinquish her grip on the floundering zombie. She gave him an extra shove with both paws for good measure, then turned and ran for the open door. She leaped into Avro's arms, and he was almost propelled backwards by the impact. Alan gunned it before the door was even closed, and Avro had to throw himself sideways, arms still wrapped around Tia, so he and the dog wouldn't tumble back out onto the pavement. When he had his feet again, he grabbed the handle of the flapping door and slammed it shut, on a scene of waving flashlights, occasional gunfire, and the hollow, hungry eyes of the zombie in the taillights. Alan made good time back to Sacred Heart. They fast-tracked through the checkpoint and managed to get Rosie to the hospital before her baby delivered. "Little fella's got a good chance," Alan said, folding his arms as he watched the stretcher disappear down a corridor, with 2 nurses and an OB/GYN in tow, accompanied by midwife and apprentice. "I suppose she doesn't have anyone," Corinne said, shaking her head sadly. "Nobody's got anybody," Alan shrugged. He was right. Avro couldn't think of a single person who had come out of the last 3 years with their family intact. Most had seen those very family members turn into bloodthirsty undead. There was nothing that scarred you quite like having to shoot your grandmother when she turned and tried to gnaw your face off. Avro shuddered, leading the way back outside. Nora, still at reception, spotted them as they passed. "Good run?" "Yeah," Avro gave her one of his winning smiles. "I think they're gonna make it." Nora beamed back, and Avro's heart lifted. He wasn't sure if he ever wanted to get into a long-term relationship or try for kids of his own. Not with the world the way it was. But a dinner date with Nora? That would be pretty nice. Before he could think of something flirty to say, Corinne steered him towards the door. "Let's go, champ. We gotta check the rig before we get another call. If those guys did anything to our baby, I'll go back there myself and have Tia hold them while—" Her rant switched to Spanish, but Avro got the idea as she punched the air several times. Alan laughed. The evening wore on, punctuated by the ever-present distant gunshots. The smell of smoke drifted in, but Avro was used to all the new sounds and smells these 3 years in hell had brought with them. They cleaned up the rig, made sure it was well stocked and fueled, then Avro played fetch with Tia for a while. It looked like it was going to be a quiet shift. Around 2 a.m., Nora came out of the building. She'd be heading home in one of the armored buses along with some other employees. Working for a facility like a hospital had its perks. To Avro's surprise, Nora walked over to where the ambulances were parked. "Hey guys," she grinned, a smile so pretty Avro could have fainted. "Hey Nora," Alan said from his lawn chair. He'd settled himself for some reading under the one street lamp they were allowed. "I just wanted to let you know that the mother delivered successfully. There were some complications, but both are doing great now. It's a little girl," Nora said. "Nice." Avro couldn't help his smile. Even in the apocalypse, there was something about a new baby that lifted your spirits. "Did they pick a name yet?" Corinne leaned on the front of the ambulance, eyes glinting in low light. "Because Corinne's a pretty nice one." "Actually," Nora considered for a moment, "I heard she liked a name that she overheard while you guys were heroically saving her from zombie attack." "One zombie," Avro held up a finger. "I guess she likes the name Tia." Nora shrugged, trying to look nonchalant as everyone else burst into laughter and Corinne swore in Spanish.